This is an emergency that actually arose at Hammersmith Hospital some time ago when a camera crew was standing by. The baby was born asphyxiated. It hadn't yet taken a breath, and it would certainly have died if endotracheal oxygen hadn't been given. When the film was made, this technique was only being used at a few centres. It's much more widely practiced now, though it isn't universal yet. They reckon that about 1,000 babies a year, that's 3 a day, could be saved if resuscitation were always done when it's needed.
Well, our first step is to note the time, because the remaining steps depend very much on the age of the baby as well as its condition. And in an emergency, it's surprising how quickly the time sometimes goes. Our next thing then is to aspirate the air passages. For this, we have a disposable mucus extractor in sterile disposable form, a delightfully simple device. You can use a swab, you can use a mechanical aspirator, but my own preference is for this very simple device. We've now removed debris, secretion, amniotic fluid, and blood particularly, sometimes even meconium. You'll probably have noticed how I carefully cleared the nasal air passages. This I feel is important because the nasal air passages are very sensitive, and very often a baby will be stimulated at this stage and will begin to gasp, and this is of course a very good thing. Our next thing then is to give oxygen from a funnel blown onto the face, held at some distance from the face because we don't want to risk inflating the lungs at this stage. What we're trying to do is, firstly, the cold air on the face may stimulate the baby to gasp, and if that baby does gasp, he's going to take in a breath of oxygen-enriched air, which will, we hope, very soon revive the respiratory center. And then, finally, at this stage, if the mother has had to have a lot of morphine or pethidine during the labor, we can give an injection of nalorphine, 0.5 of a milligram, given intramuscularly, a very good antagonist of these narcotic drugs. Well, now 2 minutes have gone, and our baby is still not breathing. What we must do now is the most certain, the most effective method of resuscitation. That is, to pass a tube into the trachea and to inflate the lungs rhythmically with air or with oxygen, to imitate the normal breathing. And if there's one thing I would like you all to carry away with you in the next 15 or 20 minutes, is the confidence to be able to accomplish this on your own one day. Well, now I'm going to go over it in some detail. First, we must get the baby in the right position. The right position is with the head very slightly extended. Overextension of the head is one of the commonest causes of failure. Then, holding the laryngoscope in your left hand, you insert it into the mouth and put the blade on the surface of the tongue, and you follow the tongue round. Now, at this point, what I'd like to explain is the most vital landmark in this procedure, and that is the epiglottis. In this sectional model, we are going to place the laryngoscope on the surface of the tongue, and we follow the tongue round until we see the epiglottis, and there it is, a little flap which comes up to meet you. Your next step is to depress the laryngoscope blade and lift the epiglottis forward, and then expose the glottis to view, and this is where the tube has to go. One of the commonest causes of failure, of course, is to miss this vital landmark and to go straight down into the esophagus. I have another little plastic model here which I think may illustrate this once again. This is the tongue that we see here, and there is the epiglottis that comes up to meet you. And there is the glottis, hidden from view behind it. Now, as you go in, of course, what you see is that, and what you must do is to put your laryngoscope blade underneath the epiglottis and just lift the flap forward, bringing the glottis into view. Well, now, let's go back to our model and see how we get on. Slight extension. We slide the laryngoscope onto the surface of the tongue, and we go in, and this is what you see. as you go further in, you should, at the root of the tongue, come across this pink flap, the epiglottis. There it is. That's the pink flap, the epiglottis, coming into view now. The next thing to do is to depress the blade and lift it up, and there's the glottis. It does not look like the glottis in an ENT book. It's a dimple on a little pink mound, and this is all you will see in the baby. This little dimple, sometimes with a little bit of froth coming from it, and there goes the tube. You pass that to a distance of 1 to 2 centimeters. Well, I dare say you'd like to see that again, so can we just have another look at that piece of film? Once more, we go in onto the surface of the tongue, and there is the epiglottis. The glottis is now in view. Mucus at this stage may be cleared away by the mucus extractor, and this in itself often provokes a gasp. Very sensitive area, this, and many babies will start to breathe before the tube is actually passed. Well, now, the next thing is to connect our tube now to a system and inflate the lungs rhythmically. And to do this, we have to have a special system, because the pressure in this system must be such that it isn't dangerous from the point of view of lung expansion. Let us follow this system down, and you will see that it goes to a simple water column with a T-tube which dips into a column of water. The T-tube can be removed any distance to lower the pressure, but the maximum pressure that is possible with this system is 40 centimeters, which is the length of the column of water. What this means is that whatever flow we use on this cylinder, the pressure will be regulated so that when I occlude this hole near the end of the tube with my finger and give rhythmic inflation of 1/2 to 1 second puffs, about 30 to 40 per minute, the baby receives a pressure of 40 centimeters of water, and excess pressure merely comes bubbling out through the top of the water column. Well, that's how it looks on a model. Perhaps we could just have another look at a real-life situation, the film you saw at the beginning of the program. He's in poor condition. Handling doesn't seem to stimulate any movement, possibly a heartbeat. This is obviously a case for immediate intubation. It really isn't nearly as difficult as it looks. This kind of tube is just a little too soft and needs an introducer, but the one we would use now wouldn't need one. Now this baby moves. He gasps when the tube is inserted. This is a good sign. It means that he isn't profoundly depressed and should respond quickly to resuscitation. Here we have nice rhythmic inflation of the lungs. 1/2 to 1 second puffs, about 30 to 40 a minute. What you can't see at this stage is a dramatic change in the baby's color, from a blue-grey shocked appearance to a nice pink. Stretching the lungs also makes him gasp. A severely asphyxiated baby may not respond for 15 minutes or more. But during this time, of course, you have to remember that while he's being artificially ventilated, he is not short of oxygen, even if he doesn't breathe spontaneously for half an hour or more. This baby's beginning to breathe spontaneously. This is a good sign, of course. He is also moving quite well. Three and a half minutes. That's a very good response to resuscitation. The baby is now breathing spontaneously through the open end of the tube. He also moves quite well. I should have thought the tube could come out now. Ah yes, here it comes. This is a good time for clearing the air passages again. A lot of fluid always drains as the lungs expand. It's worth clearing the nose. It's a strong stimulus to breathing, and babies are obligatory nose breathers anyway. We usually aspirate the stomach as well. It avoids the risk of inhalation later. Anyway, he's perfectly well now. I'm sure his prognosis is excellent. Well, I dare say that must have looked very, very difficult to you. A lot of assistance, a lot of complicated equipment. But what I should like to do now is to convince you that really this is a very simple matter which can be done with simple equipment and without elaborate apparatus. Let us look at our equipment first. The simple basic equipment that you require for this. Well, we've already discussed the funnel and the needle and syringe and the nalorphine, the mucus extractor, so there just leaves two more items. One is the laryngoscope and the other is the endotracheal tube. Our laryngoscope, I think, should be of this model. This is called a McGill neonatal laryngoscope, a long, straight, narrow blade. And with this, I think you're more likely to succeed than with any other type of model. Our endotracheal tube comes in a sterile disposable pack which can just be easily peeled open. The tube itself is a very simple tube, a straight tube which slides in without any difficulty, and it has the right degree of curvature and the right amount of flexibility so that it does not require an introducer. You will probably have noticed how that baby was carried from the labor ward to the resuscitation trolley. Here again, I feel very strongly that every labor ward, however small, the maternity unit should have its own resuscitation bay in the delivery room. After all, there may be simultaneous deliveries in every labor ward in the unit. Twins may be born. I think on the whole, there's no reason why every labor ward shouldn't set aside one small area for the reception of the baby. Once again, the requirements are very, very simple indeed. A shelf for intubating the baby, and this can be flapped downwards so as not to take up room. A shelf above for our clock and a source of light. A small cupboard for housing the equipment. Our cot can stand underneath it, and we have oxygen, mechanical suction, and our water manometer system, which I've already described. Every labor ward, I feel, should have these facilities for the resuscitation of the baby.
Dr. Barrie, is this general that medical students are not taught this sort of thing in hospital?
Alas, I'm afraid it is, yes. All medical students, I'd like to think, are now taught that intubation is the right form of resuscitation for a baby who doesn't breathe. I should imagine very few medical students are taught how to handle a laryngoscope or even get the opportunity to handle one. They may even not know what it looks like. I don't know what the answer to this is. I think we've got to do an awful lot about it, and we've got to encourage people to learn this technique. I particularly like that point of Dr. Griffith's, you know, that if you aspirate the baby's air passages under direct vision, you will learn an awful lot, even if you don't have to pass a tube. Just by looking at the anatomy and looking at the baby under direct vision with a laryngoscope, you learn to handle this instrument, and this is perhaps the best way of learning this technique.
Has cardiac massage got a place in all this?
Yes, I think it's got a limited place. I think they did 2 or 3 compressions in that film, actually. They probably weren't necessary because it was quite obvious the baby responded very quickly to intubation.
We haven't time to go into diagnosis.